So before we begin the proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and all the traditional custodians who belong to the lands where the Pearcey Foundation and you, our guests, are based. We acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders with us today and their elders past, present and emerging, whose stories, traditions and living culture in this country are a valuable resource, as are those of all who've come to make Australia their home. Together we are Australia. It's been a big year for Pearcey Foundation and we are really delighted to have our final event of the year and celebrate and recognise some of our Australian pioneers. I'd like to introduce my illustrious leader and an amazing man himself, Mr. Wayne Fitzsimmons, the chairman of the Pearcey Foundation, to carry on now.
Thank you, Kelly. And thanks to everyone tuning in, and of course to our sponsors this afternoon, the ASX, Australian Stock Exchange. Thank you for your continued support. Today we are holding our 7th conversation for 2020 with a talented lineup of speakers. I would note that all of the conversations are available on our YouTube channel. May I mention that the standout conversation on women in IT held on Linda Lovelace Day in October was fantastic. We celebrated the achievements of the many outstanding female contributors in Australia and around the world. During Victoria's Digital Innovation Festival, where we were supported by the Vic government, thanks Kathy Coultis and her team, we held 4 events, including the 2020 Pearcey Oration. This year's oration, entitled, "How do we address our resilience and preparedness in this age of mistrust?" was presented by John Blackburn, AO, a great insight into how our nation needs to rethink its long-term strategies. A Digital Innovation Festival Pearcey Institute roundtable on the topic of Australia as a technology-led economy after the 2020 pandemic was moderated by our Pearcey Institute Chair, Dennis Tebbit. A very thought-provoking discussion involving Victoria's Minister for Government Services, the Honourable Denny Pearson. Notable for 2020 also was the commencement of documenting the definitive history of the Australian ICT industry. With the help of a distinguished advisory panel under the leadership of our Dr. Peter Thorne, we commissioned Graham Phillipson to get cracking. He has already completed the early period of the local industry up and beyond 1960, and now there is an extensive review underway of the material for the remainder of the book. This includes many extensive personal interviews of our own Pearcey medalists and Hall of Famers. And last but not least, we are working with Sydney University's business schools, Dr. Sebastian Burl, in undertaking more than 50 interviews, including many of our Pearcey medalists and Hall of Famers, as research material to analyse how and why Australia's ICT entrepreneurs made their commercial business decisions in years past. As I mentioned, all of our conversations and the oration have been recorded and can be seen on our YouTube channel. Please check out our websites. One last notable matter. In August 2021, the Pearcey Foundation is planning to hold a 70th anniversary celebration of the first ever Australian Computer Conference held in August 1951, hosted by Sydney University and CSIRO's Department of Radiophysics. We will publicise this event extensively in 2021, as it is a great milestone for our Australian industry. It's my great pleasure to introduce the Pearcey Foundation Treasurer and outgoing Chair of the New South Wales Pearcey Committee, Simon Foster, to take the reins for what's sure to be a fascinating panel discussion, our final Pearcey conversation for 2020, with some fantastic leaders in the industry. Simon, we are in your very capable hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. As Wayne's mentioned, this is the final Pearcey conversation for the year, and after a less than ordinary year for many, I'm very excited to be sitting down with some great minds as we look forward to 2021. We're going to hear some of their personal insights and predictions on what the new year may bring. So we're thrilled to have sharing with us today CEO and founder of LumaChain and also the 2020 New South Wales Pearcey entrepreneur, Jamila Gordon, Queensland's Chief Entrepreneur, Leanne Kemp, Managing Director of Human VC, Elaine Stead, and who you've already had the pleasure of meeting this afternoon, the new Director of CSIRO's Data 61, Jon Whittle. If you have any burning questions for any or all of the panel, please do throw them into the Q&A function you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and I'll get to as many of them as I can in a little while. For now, let's get right to it. Let's start with you, Elaine. Perhaps from an investment perspective, what's your crystal ball telling you for 2021?
Oh, goodness. Start with an easy question, Simon. Thank you. Look, I see a lot of parallels between, I'm old enough, sadly, to have been an investor during the GFC as well. So I remember the last time we kind of had a pause and a hibernation like we've had this year as a result of the global pandemic. But I think there are some differences, but I think there are some parallels as well, which I think makes it a little bit easier to have a bit of a crystal ball for 2021. But I think, we've seen a lot of companies that have done exceptionally well as a result of what's happened, but we've also seen a lot of companies that have had to hibernate in order to survive. And we've also seen a number of companies had to get really creative and be incredibly innovative to stay alive. And if there's one thing that an event like this sort of global shock that we've all had is shape some of our, more comfortable companies and entrepreneurs into being just that little bit more innovative and a little bit more entrepreneurial, which is fantastic. But from the investment side of things, we have seen investors conserving capital, not knowing how long this would last. And of course, we're really starting to see things ramp up again. And I think that's the result of some optimism around forthcoming vaccines and things maybe getting back to normal sooner rather than later. But I think what we've seen is that what I think we're trending towards in 2021, though, is we've had a number of funds which over the last few years, particularly in Australia, have gotten rather large, and which is great because there's a great article in the Financial Review about the trends of venture capital over the last little while. And it was almost dead 5 years ago. So we've seen these large funds accumulate over time. And what that's necessarily meant is that they've invested in later stage opportunities. And what we've also seen in the background is with the result of COVID is we've seen people make a run on superannuation, and that will inevitably mean that the investors into VC funds will have to look for more growth assets over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think that's going to mean more money actually goes into venture capital, but because there is so much already concentrated at the larger end of the spectrum, I think the good news is that that's going to mean we're going to have more capital being allocated to early stage investments. So I think that's good news for a lot of the entrepreneurs that are probably listening on this call. And I think it dovetails really nicely with what we've seen in the university sector, where a lot of universities have had to look at other revenue streams outside of, typical Category 1 grant funding, and have refocused their attention on technology commercialisation. And so I think we'll see a nice sort of dovetail of those two things clashing over the next little while. So I think it's good news. It might take longer than perhaps what I'm, making it out to be. Wouldn't be the first time I've been accused of being a Pollyanna, but I do think it's a positive. I think it's a positive trend that we'll see, and it's now up to us to try and take the best advantage of it.
Thank you for that. That's fantastic. Let's move over to you, Jamila. What do you foresee on the horizon for 2021 from perhaps an AI, supply chain, or research perspective?
Thank you, Simon. Mark Andreessen famously said that software is eating the world. Well, now, nearly 10 years later, we're seeing artificial intelligence eating the world. We're seeing every corner and every industry of the world being impacted by AI. It's going beyond the tech-first industries like banking, insurance companies, airlines, and now we're seeing it in the mainstream, and the trend is going to continue. We're going to see in the 2021 a huge increase in computer vision-based AI. I was talking to my colleague and a friend of mine in Microsoft US 2 days ago, and he said they've developed a tech for elderly people with dementia that computer vision watching them, are they safe? Are they eating? Are they sleeping? And alerting a nurse if there's something wrong and avoiding risks before even they become a problem. Also using AI to do natural language translation to that person's, a trained voice for that person's child, because maybe that is the voice they remember or respond to, saying something like, Mom, Mommy, it's time to eat, or Mommy, it's time to take your medicine. In terms of LumaChain, computer vision, we specialize in computer vision. We are using computer vision transforming the meat and the food industry. Our CV, computer vision, improves the food safety, the workers' safety, while also increasing the efficiency inside the food processing plants. Our mission is food traceability from farm to fork, while keeping the employees safe. So the food is not only safe and ethically produced, but workers are safe as well, all using computer vision and obviously a thin layer of blockchain, so you cannot dispute the data. It's data writing machine to machine. What else? My son has just finished HSC, and him and his friends who have got the passion for maths, I encourage them to do engineering and focus on AI, because that is going to be huge. It's going to be similar to what we have seen in early 90s, the ERP systems, or 2007 when we were seeing the mobile phones. And now 2021, my prediction is that's where we are today. We're starting to see that taking off. For next 10 years, it's going to be huge.
Thank you, Jamila, and congratulations to your son. My son also just finished HSC. So now across to Leanne. As Queensland Chief Entrepreneur, I'm sure there are plenty of things you're hoping to see 2021 bring. Can you perhaps share with us some of your thoughts around the opportunities for the coming year and beyond?
Well, thank you for having me. Perfect timing given the most recent election and the re-election of our Premier. But I cast upon that moment because of the new portfolios that the government has put in place, which embraces digital economy. We have a minister now for water, a minister for hydrogen and renewables. And if we were to cast a stone forward into 2030, we would largely say that's what the future is holding. There are a number of rising sets of policy enactments that are well under place, looking as well towards the future around circular economy as a prime example, particularly with the federal government closing its borders to waste. And I think we'll start to see manufacturing has been on the lips of many presidents and prime ministers across the world. But as we start to align internationally with the free trade agreement with the UK, I hold some promise that, of course, we will start to see extended producer responsibilities or right to repair legislation coming at the forefront of parts of our economic turn points. That will provide for entirely new reasonings for regional and rural Queensland and even broadly for Australia. As the Global Chair for the World Economic Forum and Policy Advisor to the OECD, I can assure you that Queensland is certainly at the forefront and at the table in these discussions and the formations, but it's good to see that state level involvement and even local government involvement is starting to put a lot of the right sets of activations in place and signalling the market towards renewables and hydrogen, as well as the digital economy. It's very clear that supply chains are starting to be transformed with trust and transparency and traceability as the new digital rails for trade. And using technologies, as we know, with blockchain and artificial intelligence is only one step forward in the fight towards what is now largely a consumer consciousness in terms of where we think it's going. I think our entrepreneurs are strengthened by the challenges that we've just faced. And if we're seasoned entrepreneurs like Elaine is, and I've seen a number of challenges in my time, that COVID has provided a really interesting opportunity for the strength of entrepreneurship and innovation, and even innovation logic to be threaded horizontally, not only just across governments, but also within large corporations. We're seeing an uplift of intrapreneurs within large corporates, understanding that innovation is a must-have now, and that certainly business models that were relied upon in the last decade cannot be assured as the future of today, or let alone tomorrow. Funding, of course, is always on the forefront of entrepreneurs' minds and founders, but the most reliable sense of funding, of course, is running directly to revenue. So find your customer and be that first customer. And hence, that's the largest message that I continuously take into government. How can government be bold, not just only spearhead or masthead these new policy positions or put ministers in front of portfolios, but how do we actually enable the change through procurement and signing checks where the government can become a customer?
Thank you very much. And I know the government as a customer is very close to many of the entrepreneurs on the call and the Pearcey Foundation. It's a great way for Australia to reinvest in other Australians. Finally, Jon, with the recent release of the Global Trade and Investment Megatrends report by CSIRO, Data61 and Austrade, wondering if you'd like to share some of your thoughts around the 5 megatrends identified in that report that are said to be reshaping global trade and investment over the coming months and years.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Simon. So as you mentioned, Data61 recently brought out a report in collaboration with Austrade that was deliberately looking at what emerging megatrends there are in the economic landscape in a kind of post-COVID world. And that report identified 5 emerging or new megatrends. The first of those, not surprisingly, was digital transformation. We've seen about 10 years of digital transformation take place in just a matter of months. And we expect that transformation will continue to accelerate over the coming months and years as, lots of industry sectors try to navigate their way out of economic recession and therefore look to technology for productivity gains. The second megatrend that's already been mentioned is investing in supply chain resilience. Obviously, with the impact of the pandemic, we saw a lot of sectors seeing their supply chains severely strained, if not broken. And so in investing in those and including in some of the technologies that already have been mentioned, such as blockchain and AI. Thirdly, we expect to see an emerging megatrend towards localization and staying closer to home. So there are signs that the economy is picking up, and that includes the travel industry. But we're not sure that people are just going to go back to the way that they traveled before. They've got a different mindset now, and so that's going to lead to people staying closer to home. The fourth megatrend is really about, just what new economic landscape we're now in, because although, again, we've got the shoots of economic recovery coming through, we've got, new levels of national debt, we've got high unemployment levels and natural caution around investment levels as well. So that's going to present some challenges. And then fifthly, and finally, the other megatrend that we highlighted was what we call stepping into the new normal. So this is really accepting the fact that, this is likely not to be the last pandemic that we will face. We've also got challenges that we're going to have to face in terms of climate change and bushfires and floods and drought and so forth, which means that a new normal is essentially going to be being proactive rather than reactive to these challenges, and being in a situation where we're constantly having to be willing to adapt to whatever the world throws at us. Now, the other thing that we highlight in that report is those are the 5 emerging megatrends, but then the question is, what can we do about it, and what are the opportunities for Australia in particular? And we have identified a number of different opportunities there. So one is about renewed investment in R&D. It's kind of interesting that if you look at a lot of the tech companies that we've come to know and love today, such as IBM, WhatsApp, Uber, and so forth, many, if not most of these, were actually created during an economic recession. So I think, a recession is actually a great time for innovation, but it does require R&D investment to make that happen. We're seeing great opportunity for Australia to boost its digital exports. If you look, of course, at the sectors of the economy that did well during the pandemic versus the ones that didn't. It's the digital technology sector, you know, with the online retail, online entertainment, and so forth, doing very, very well indeed. And that creates opportunities for Australia really to take that opportunity by the scruff of the neck and boost its own digital services export economy. There we see opportunities in disaster tech. So again, coming back to bushfires, entering into bushfire season again now, but all kinds of opportunities there for technology to be used either proactively avoiding natural disasters or managing them once they've happened. Another action that we feel needs to be taken is in pandemic-proof international education. So of course, the university sector has been severely hit, more than most sectors, with the drying up of international students, and they're highly dependent on that for their finances. They've moved very, very quickly to online education. Hopefully international students will start to return soon, but even when they do, I think there's questions to be asked about what does, you know, education look like for those international students in the future. Again, probably not just going back to the same old way it was before. Then finally, we also see opportunities in, you know, kind of digitizing further areas of strength for the Australian economy, such as critical minerals, exports, and also digital agriculture. So I think in, you know, 2021, as we start to emerge from the economic recession that the pandemic has put us into, and of course is a tragic thing in more than one way, it does present lots of opportunities for Australia and innovation more generally.
Brilliant. Many thanks, John. That was great. For everyone, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We've had a couple of questions come in. Please do add some more for our panel. In the meantime, I'm going to ask our panel to consider, what have you learned through the pandemic? And is there anything that you will keep as we go back into normal? And I might start with Jamila. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm out. I'm out of mute. What we learned. So coming from a tech industry and both the vendor side and the in-house as a CIO, I have seen working from home being all embraced by the tech companies when I worked for Deloitte and IBM implementing big systems, but in-house as a CIO for large corporations, Qantas, CIMIC, slightly different. And I saw both sides. And now when I first created founded LumaChain to attract amazing talent, especially moms and dads who wanted that flexibility, I said everyone can work from home Mondays and Fridays. This is way before the COVID-19. And I did receive amazing people for that purpose. They lived anywhere but not Sydney. I'm talking about regional areas of New South Wales, and were able to produce amazing work. Pandemic happened, and for us it was like it's never happened, and nothing has from a technology perspective. My tech team developers always liked to work from home anyway. That really amplified without feeling that society's guilt that we can actually do all our work remotely, and attracted even more people and made everyone happier. So I think one thing the tech industry has taken for granted, which was working from home or working from anywhere and being productive, is something that the world has now been forced to do and been showed that can actually work. Tech can deliver what you need to happen, unless you're an essential worker and have to go to processing plant and factories and or doctors, do physical work. But really, that is one thing I was always knew it was the best thing for tech companies, but now, and parents who wanted that flexibility, but now that opportunity was given to everyone, which is fantastic. And we will stay with that.
Thanks, Jamila. Leanne, did you have a perspective on that? What would you keep from the pandemic response?
Look, one of the big questions I have is if humanity can put our economies on hold to safeguard against the global threat like COVID-19, then why haven't we been able to take similar measures to confront the global killer of climate change? And, you know, it would cost the US government $5.7 trillion to transition completely to renewable energies over 15 years, whilst it's already committed $6 trillion in COVID-19 in the past 3 to 6 months. So for me, it's probably a bigger question than an answer, to be honest, but let's hope change is upon us.
Thank you. Elaine?
Yeah, I think one slightly esoteric thing and one practical thing. So I think what I've taken from the pandemic, which has always been the case, but it just made it more obvious, was just how uncertain everything really is, and how you can't sort of take for granted that things are going to move in this, you know, lovely, you know, epic growth of the economy without a recession for a really long time. You know, there's always going to be shocks, and we need to get more resilient to those shocks in all aspects of our society. The other thing that I think has been an interesting conversation that has gained a bit more traction since the pandemic hit is this concept of modern monetary theory. And, you know, to Leanne's point about how we're often told by government there are these fiscal constraints that stop us from doing these things that really matter. You know, there is an emerging and louder view that modern monetary theory says that is just simply not true, and that we really do have the resources to try and fix some of these things that we believe are just, you know, too hard. And so I look forward to that continuing to gain some more ground, and hopefully us being able to wrestle some of these bigger issues like climate change and others as well, because now we've shown that we can.
Thank you, Elaine. That's a nice segue. I'm going to adjust the question slightly for Jon. And that's, I do quite a bit of business in Singapore, and their COVID response has been interesting in that they've required digitalization from small businesses before they can receive it. So it's a precondition to getting their equivalent of JobKeeper. So they've used this opportunity not just to support their economy, but to really transform it. Is that something you see could work in Australia? Are there other things you've seen in other places around the world that we should be considering here in terms of COVID response and retaining it?
Okay, you threw me then, because I was all ready to answer the other question, and now I've got a different question without any thought time.
Well, you can answer the first one as well then.
Yeah, oh look, maybe I'll just try and answer the first one, which is in some ways related to that second question as well. I mean, I think for me, I mean, I started at CSIRO at the end of July. I'm based in Melbourne. That was right when we were going into stage 4 lockdown. To run Data 61, it has about 1,000 staff and affiliates at 14 different sites across the country. In any normal circumstance, pre-COVID, it would have been a lot of jumping on a plane to go around and get to meet all my staff and so forth. I couldn't do any of that, so I had to build relationships with that very large number of staff through Zoom and WebEx. And in fact, even today, my core leadership team of about 10 people, many interactions with them, but I've never met any of them face to face. I'm wondering what will happen when I do finally meet them face to face, and maybe I'll be like, "Oh, you're taller than I thought you were," or something like that. Interestingly enough, it's all worked rather well, and it's given me a incredible flexibility. I've got 2 young kids, 6-year-old daughters. It makes it easy now that schools are back in for me to just take a break during the working day and go and pick them up, and so I've got a lot more quality time to spend with those kids. So certainly want to see that, and I don't envisage going back to full-time in the office and traveling all the time. But I guess what I really want to say about that is that that's a luxury. And not everybody has that luxury. You know, we often talk about this great revolution towards working from home, but not everybody has had that luxury. You know, some people do physically, in fact, many people, large numbers of people do have to physically go to work still in the same way that they were before. And I think what we should be thinking about in terms of the future is how, you know, whatever opportunities come up in a new normal, you know, whatever we decide to keep, we need to be sure that we're not creating another digital divide. We've already seen that women and young people were more clearly disadvantaged during the pandemic than, you know, people like myself, for example. We just need to be careful that we don't accelerate that trend where we've got, you know, a year from now or 5 years from now, part of the workforce that are, you know, have a very kind of flexible modes of working, and some that don't have that luxury to kind of go and pop and pick up their kids in the middle of the day and so forth. So I think that's a real challenge that we need to think through quite deeply.
Thank you, John. I'll pass across to Leanne to my earlier question, which was, or the other part of the question, which was Singapore have associated digitalization and a transformation of their economy. Singapore has, with their COVID response. As it looks like we're going into a period where we're going to focus on infrastructure building, do you think there's a role for government to incentivize business in that way?
Critical. It's a must-have. Not that I have any political aspirations, but if I was, it'd be front and centre for me. We think about state development and infrastructure, and we're laying roads, but there is no digital infrastructure overlay that exists, and it just is simply critical in everything that we build, and also all grant funding that we're issuing. Just as we should be not simply just handing out grant enablements for entrepreneurs, let's put them through the CEO School of Entrepreneurship. Let's enable them to understand what a true cash flow model looks like and what a cash runway actually truly means. So I think a lot of that should be conditional to any money is the educational piece, and we can strengthen that muscle to not just only think about resiliency, but also lift it to the next level in anti-fragility, so we can do that muscle strength learning. But most definitely, we should definitely have, just as we have driver's licenses for those that drive a car on the road, we should have the same thing when it comes to digital enablement within business, industry, and anything exporting, particularly as we start to think about the free trade agreements that are in place and digital trade windows that will absolutely come to the forefront of international trade quite rapidly. That's already been transformational with Singapore. Australia's just a little slow to the race.
Elaine, I can see you nodding your head there. So anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think Leanne has hit it on the head.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go to our questions from the audience. So the first one, which is from Warwick Peel, and it's actually for you, Elaine. Tech can make the equality battle more seamless. What types of emerging tech is Human VC looking at the moment?
Oh my goodness. So we've been focusing on mostly health tech, to be honest. So anything that improves wellness, and that wellness can be across a pretty wide spectrum. So not necessarily the med tech or pharmaceutical technology spectrum, but some things that might sit outside of that traditional definition, because I think that's, you know, where people's view of health and well-being is expanding into. It's above and beyond just taking pills and you know, inserting devices. And so that's the area that I'm focused on at the moment at Human VC. I'm not sure it necessarily would be considered a seamless tech, but I think if anything, this year has certainly proven that, you know, in terms of assets that are very hard to recover, health and time are the two that are most valuable to us. And so I can't do much about time just yet, but the health side I absolutely can.
Great. Do any of our other panelists have a perspective on how tech can make equality more or the equality battle rather, more seamless? No?
I think we've got to design technology for those that are least educated, that have the least amount of connectivity rather than the highest common order. And I'm sure that a lot of companies don't take that first step, right? It's a difficult market to be able to transform entire emerging economies. I know that we have about 280 users on our platform in 32 different countries around the world that are large gem traders. And we ran into that burning building per se to make sure that the lowest common denominator or the most struggling user was able to adopt and adapt that technology from day one. It would have been easier for us to, of course, run into New York and connect in with the large retail outlets, but certainly we wanted to make sure that Tech for Good was at the forefront of how we were designing the application from day one.
Simon, I would like to comment on that as well. I sit at the advisory board of, or the council of Questacon. And as you know, Questacon is a building that for kids as well as grown-ups, you go there, you get inspired, science, tech, innovation. And one of the things to address digital divide, we have portable Questacon that we take to regional areas and spend time to take that innovation and that inspiration to the kids at all levels in Indigenous communities as well as regional communities. And I think we want to see more of that from schools, from other leaders and educators to do more of that to drive digital or minimize that digital divide.
So, and just to add to that, so I think what we actually need here is new ways of developing these technologies. So we've been doing some work on looking at embedding human values into technology. So that would include equality, but also other things like fairness and transparency and so forth. From Data 61, we worked with the government and brought out last year Australia's AI ethics framework that sets out 8 high-level principles that AI systems should adhere to. But we've still got a next step that there needs to be a lot more work on, which is how do you actually translate those principles into practice? Because the problem that we have now is that there's lots of ethical principles around the world to kind of guide AI developers and so forth, but they are usually very, very high level. And if you're a software developer on the ground and you're told, well, make your product inclusive, then of course you're going to agree with that. But what does that actually mean in practice? And that's the big missing piece. But coupled with that, I think we also need to change the way that we educate our technologists. Most of our computer scientists, data scientists that go through our university systems get very little exposure to these kinds of questions, and yet they are the ones that are going to be developing these technologies. So the conversations are just not taking place. And even Jamila's example earlier of using an AI system that could mimic a child's voice to give instructions to an elderly patient, that actually filled me with horror, because lots of ethical issues there. It could have a very positive benefit, no question, but we at least need to be, when we're developing those technologies, discussing the possible drawbacks and making sure that we mitigate for those drawbacks. And I don't think those conversations are going on anywhere near enough. And then we just need more diversity in our tech workforce as well. If you look at AI professors, for example, 80% of AI professors are male. And in the tech industry, not just in Australia, but more broadly, it is still a chronic underrepresentation of women. It's great to see so many women on the panel today and the medalist award winner, but more broadly, we've still got a massive problem with that. And until we actually have a workforce that is more representative of society, then we're really in danger of developing tech that doesn't have that tech for good angle to it.
Simon, if I just comment on that, the AI for the child, the person who has got the dementia's child's voice, that is Microsoft's technology, and it has an ethics committee that reports to the CEO. I know that, who approves every voice. Just to comment on that. So it's not available to everyone. Even if you have all the money in the world, it's not available.
Thank you. So I'll move on to another question. Clearly, local manufacturing will be crucial to protect supply chains. What are some of the challenges for the local industry to step up to this challenge, in your opinion? And I'll start actually with Jamila, since you do have a supply chain business. You're on mute. There's the one thing we need to learn from COVID.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Of course. Clearly, local manufacturing will be crucial to protect supply chains. What are some of the challenges for the local industry to step up to this challenge?
I think if I look at the manufacturing that we do, I have my blinkers and I'm focused on the meat industry. If we look at the meat industry, I think what I will say is one of the things might be trying to leapfrog the old technologies. When I see the techs that banking, the first tech companies have implemented, and now they're evolving out to help them leapfrog and straight go to the new tech and not worry about the traditional technology, because you don't really need it. If you can capture the data from machine to machine and have that data stored and analyzed and have predictive analysis, you don't really need to buy the traditional transactional data for the purpose of transforming your business. It doesn't need to go back to the old history. And I've seen it firsthand in Africa, where mobile technology or mobile banking is number one. They don't need to go through the having banks, physical banks, as well as machines that give you money, ATMs. So I think in manufacturing, even though the techs available today, they're not fast tech companies. We need to help them to transform and leapfrog to the latest.
Thank you. I might try something else, and hopefully Carolyn and Cyrus can make this happen. Grant, our new Entrepreneur of the Year as a local manufacturer, I wonder if you had an opinion on this and what we can do to encourage local industry and the challenges to doing stuff locally.
Yeah, I do have an opinion, but I'm not sure if it's going to line up with everyone else's. We manufacture obviously in multiple locations, and there's reasons why we do in different places. I think maybe a better way to look at it is, how would you destroy manufacturing? That might be an interesting way to look at it. Like, if you really wanted to kill every bit of manufacturing in this country, how would you do that? So maybe that's a good starting point. Well, I think the way you do it is you drop duties on all products coming in, and then you have a high minimum wage. That's how you destroy it. And you have a poor quality culture. Now, I'm not saying stuff here that's going to make everyone feel happy, and these are tough problems. So what do you do about those 3 points? Well, the quality culture, I mean, there's a terrible quality. I mean, one of the things about coming out of COVID is I walk down to local cafes and suddenly I'm horrified by the quality of service. We just don't treat each other very well in service businesses in this country. And we have to understand that quality comes first. You know, we can sell products. You know, one of the points that were being talked about before about, you know, transformation, just make a good product. If you want a country that's going to innovate, make a product people want to buy. It's quite simple. You know, this product here is a whole TV station, and it's $300. You make a great product that people can afford to buy, and individuals will buy them first. We don't need large government programs. That's not going to change things. What you need to do is change it on a very granular level. So let's think about destroying manufacturing. How do you want to destroy it? Well, you pretty much do what we've done. Now, what happens if you change each one of those parameters? If you increase duties, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to now isolate Australia from supply chains. So you can't do that. If you're going to decrease minimum wage, we're going to go back 150 years and you're going to have a working poor. So we can't really do that. So what do you do? So I think the problem is we have to come up with alternative solutions. Maybe one of the ways to do it is to have a negative tax system where there is no minimum wage, but it's replaced by government paying for, below a certain level. So the government actually pays, so instead of it being unemployment benefits, because like if you look at country towns, they're devastated. Half the town's on unemployment, prescription medication problems. I mean, people don't realize how bad things actually are. We're shielded from that in the cities, so maybe there's some big ideas, and I don't know exactly what the solutions are, but I do know what we have now is the absolute perfect recipe for the destruction of our industrial base. So if you want to do that, great, we're really, really good at it. If you don't want that, if you actually want manufacturing, then you have to start thinking of some really out there solutions, because a lot of the systems we have in place have been around for 100 or so years. So maybe the minimum wage should be replaced by the government pays for it. If the government says to me, if I'm going to put a factory in a country town, for example, where I can have a lot of land and it's cheap, I could put a bunch of solar panels in on a farm and just a great charity would be just to build solar farms and feed them to country towns. At least you could compensate for the distance problem. But I've got to get materials to the country town. I've got things back, but I do get cheap land. The country towns have got a lot of, unemployed people. There's, huge cultural problems there. Maybe the trick would be if the government actually paid, now there's got to be an incentive for you to actually want to earn more. And as you get more skilled and you get going, but what it would do is potentially you need a swashbuckling, entrepreneurial, crazy manufacturing spirit. And manufacturing also has to be understood. It's extremely complicated. The most amount of work I probably put in is actually how we manufacture our products. Because if you get better at that, it gives you all the power in the world. The reason China's powerful is because they can build stuff. And they can and that's why America became powerful, because they had 40 aircraft carriers when they attacked, Japan in Okinawa. That's a massive amount of construction of stuff. If you want a powerful country, you need to be able to manufacture things. It's the crucial everything. But everything we're doing right now is the perfect recipe for destruction. Now, what other answers are? I don't know. I don't even know the answer to these questions. If you try and discuss these points, it's like, oh, you're a psychopath. It's like, no, actually, but there's got to be some solutions. There's got to be people out there that know the answers to these questions. So I think the question is, would a negative tax system work? Would maybe building charity-based free solar farms and just pumping free power into country towns? If you had free power, people would put batteries in, they'd store it. The factories could move in because they'd have free power. Maybe there's wacky, interesting ideas that could be done, and even done by individuals who actually want to make this stuff happen. So I've got I know what works and what doesn't work in manufacturing, and what we do doesn't work. And it's not going to be solved by government programs. It's just not. The government's run out of steam. We've got zero interest rates, no interest rates on bonds, properties bubbled out. It can't be done centrally. When we changed the TV industry, we did it at a granular individual level. We did it piece by piece. And it's only later that the big companies came along and started using our products. Initially, it was all small individual people doing individual stuff. You've got to have faith in people. People are amazing. People will do incredible things. Just help make them free. Put coding into schools. Put other courses into schools about, we don't teach people about money or business in schools, but particularly maybe coding. Get to the kids. Don't give anyone any government money unless they're under 30. Get to swashbuckling young people are going to try crazy ideas, and they shouldn't actually have an education in business. Let them come from wacky, you need to not constrain their thoughts. That's why nature will kill us all and we will get old and die, because it wants to replace us because we've got constrained thoughts based on our experience and our knowledge and our education. So that's actually a complacency. So that's it's an overly condensed, version of what I think, but I've got unfinished thoughts about it. I don't exactly know what the answers are, but what we are doing is basically a perfect recipe for failure.
Thank you, Grant. I just wanted to very briefly, Leanne, if you had a perspective on that. We've got about a minute.
Yeah, look, I think the cost base for energy in Australia is absorbently high, and that whether we're trying to put together a green aluminium out of our Boyne smelter in far north Queensland, or whether we're a small manufacturer, I think there are a number of things that can happen. Certainly, we're a very inventive bunch here. So firstly, the tyranny of distance can become our friend. How can we put micro factories into play so that, regional Queensland can pick up a right to repair legislation that might exist for parts that just don't deem, or warrant the just-in-time bulk buying out of China, but we will be able to. We can't compete on cost, full stop. I totally agree with where Grant's going, but maybe durability is something that we can compete on. And if we can really bring together the best of our minds in material science, then who's to also say that we're not able to make entirely new industrialized product streams that will support new inventive steps in product manufacturing that can actually see a recursive loop of use? So that circular economy piece, I think we can largely lead the world in.
Okay, so now
we're not getting cars back, so forget it. Manufacturing in Australia is not about bringing the cars back. That ship's gone and dead and sailed. But there are many other things that we can do. I will also say that every manufacturer will die trying because they don't see themselves in the data business. They see themselves as a manufacturer making a widget or some type of little tool. But as soon as we can transform that everyone is in the data business, then we've got a completely new leap forward in intelligent manufacturing, not just manufacturing at a cost base. So I think that's the advantage. And I'm the global chair for the World Economic Forum for Advanced Manufacturing. So happy to take some of your thoughts forward up to the WEF.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our panelists. It's been a very interesting conversation. So to Elaine, Jon, Jamila, Leanne, thank you. Thank you again. I'm now going to pass across to Kelly Hutchinson to officially close what has been a wonderful afternoon. Over to you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you to everybody. I think everybody must be feeling invigorated and inspired. I think we've finally turned a bit of a corner, but there's so much that, you know, we can harness our energies, our passion, our intelligence, and actually fix some of the challenges that have been identified this year. And I think within an ethical framework, within an inclusive and reflective of the country that we are and that we're becoming and what we want to be. And I think that's what gives me hope. And I think is one of the reasons that the Pearcey Foundation exists, is to bring people together like yourselves, to recognise you, but then also give you space to have these conversations. We've been doing these this year, and I think it is that thing about the, I think Rachel wrote about Zoom fatigue. Who cares? Because when the actual conversation is inspiring, it is fantastic. And we have been honoured to have you all today, but also the speakers that we've had throughout the year. We've looked at some really interesting and contentious topics, because that is what we do as the Pearcey. And as you know, we heard all about Trevor Pearcey, you know, turning up and saying, hey, I'm not quite sure exactly what I'm going to do with this, but trust me, it's going to be great. Or it may not be, because that's what innovation and having a go means. And I think that we're really hearing that there are some shifts, and it's the data and digital, and we've been very strong on software and platforms, but actually it's how might that actually move into some of this circular economy, and the self-reliance is actually one of the big themes that we talked about this year with the Pearcey Institute. So it's definitely something we want to keep talking about, but it's also things we want to actually do something about. So I think great, thank you, Leanne, for that channel up into the global discussion about these things. And, you know, I think one of the things about Australia is we do have a reputation for pushing the boundaries there. So Grant, I thoroughly encourage you to, you know, to keep pushing and making these changes, and Jamila and everybody. So I really wish you all a happy holiday season that we're actually going to have, we hope, and I think we are. And we want to thank ASX, our sponsors, for your continued support, because this is a volunteer organisation, and like with all organisations, you know, our costs are low this year because we don't have to have dinner, but we still have to maintain and keep running organisations, and it really is through the contribution of a significant amount of volunteers who believe in this collective action towards a positive, productive, inclusive technology and digital society. So I really will pass on my sincere thanks on behalf of all of our industry representatives, our state and national committee members, and for your work this year. It's been tireless, but I think it's really driven and shown that there really is a role for an organisation like Pearcey to look to the past, to reflect on today, and then know where we want to head tomorrow. And really thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon and ongoing support of the foundation to all of our friends. So thank you very much and enjoy your evening.